Hello, you're listening to Send in the Experts with Georgina Durrant. This podcast is all about teaching and supporting children and young people with special educational needs and disabilities, SEND. My name is Georgina Durrant. I'm the host of this podcast brought to you by Twinkle SEND. As a former teacher in Senko myself, I wanted to create a platform to share some of the amazing things that my guests are doing to support learners with SEND. So whether you're listening on your commute, tuning in whilst walking your dog, or curled up on the sofa with a nice cup of coffee, thank you so much for joining us. In this episode, I am delighted to be joined by Bethan Grant and Sarah Timms from ERIC, the Children's Bowel and Bladder charity. Sarah has worked at ERIC for 4 years as Head of Family Services and Support for the past 2.5 years. Sarah oversees the running of the helpline and finding other ways to support families, whether through webinars or video resources. Sarah has lots of experience of working with families thanks to her background in family support and safeguarding. Bethan Grant has worked at ERIC for 8 years in various roles. She is currently Head of Digital and Engagement at ERIC, overseeing the communications team and helping to create and share information and resources for families and professionals. I feel very lucky to have both of you on. Thank you so much for joining me. How are you both?
Thank you. Really good, thank you. Yes.
Good. So for our listeners who might not have heard of ERIC, are you able to briefly explain what the charity does, who it supports and how you support them?
Hello, Georgina. Yes, so ERIC, the Children's Bowel and Bladder charity, is a nationwide charity. We've been around for just over 30 years, and ERIC is an acronym. It stands for Education and Resources for Improving Childhood Continence, which is a bit of a mouthful, which is why we called ourselves ERIC for short. We were originally set up to support families whose children had bedwetting issues, and we focused exclusively on that. But over time, we've broadened our remit and now support families whose children have toileting and bowel and bladder conditions across the spectrum. So we have, we're dealing with constipation, bedwetting, withholding, potty training, toileting anxiety, everything that you can think to do with bladders and bowels in children. And we do this through our helpline, which is free to access through telephone and email. Wow. We have our family services team, as you've already said. Sarah hosts lots of webinars and online events and some face-to-face events sometimes for families to support them with various different topics. And we have a website full of resources for families and for health professionals to help them when they're working in clinic or in hospitals with families that are referred to them. And we also have a very strong online professionals training program. So we do train a lot of NHS professionals to help them improve the quality of care that children get with the support with continence issues.
Wow, you do so much. That's a lot. And so the phone number am I able to put the phone number in the show notes for people to ring? And it's just completely free. For somebody's thinking right now, I could just do with some advice, they'll be able to just ring that number and someone will pick up.
Absolutely. Yeah, and we are open. That helpline is open Monday to Thursdays, 10 till 2 p.m. every day.
Oh,
it is busy.
Yeah,
it is busy. So please, if you don't get through the first time, do keep trying. And like we said, there is a web form that you can complete to get email support if you can't get through on the phone.
Brilliant. And some people do prefer the email support as well, don't they? Sometimes having a phone call, especially about something that's a little bit more delicate, perhaps they might prefer to have an email. That's fantastic. So if we think from an SEND point of view, and what toileting problems can children have in general, and are there specific ones that are linked to children who might have special educational needs and disabilities? For example, I think I read that some autistic children are more likely to have constipation, and I was interested in hearing a little bit more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the most common toileting problem, it affects 1 in 3 children, is constipation.
Right.
So this is what we deal with day in, day out on our helpline. Other problems include soiling, withholding wee, withholding poo, daytime wetting and bedwetting as well. Yeah. But as I said, the most common one is constipation. Typically, very often happens around potty training time.
Yeah.
So in terms of children who've got special educational needs, there are more challenges because there might be barriers around communication. So this is where, we might say that they might not always recognise the signals coming from their bowel and their bladder. They might have anxiety as well as challenges when dealing with change.
Yes.
So when you get to that toilet training aspect, you know, a different feel once the nappy's removed, or the feel of pants, the sensation of wet clothes, all these different things, you know, and there's so much we could talk about with this.
There really is, isn't there? Because, like you say, like the sensory issues of even a nappy, I imagine, for children who've got sensory processing differences, I imagine the nappy, then the change to wearing pants and all of that is going to be, it could be a huge problem.
Yeah. And if this might be slightly too much information, but you know, most children get very used to the feeling of the poo pressed against them, the warm poo pressed against with their nappy on. And so when you remove that, there's that fear of the poo falling away from them, so they might try and hold their poo in. So we deal with things like that as well. Another aspect of for children with additional needs is that obviously you might get a restricted diet. You might have some children who have a restricted diet, very limited, that can have an impact on the bowels. We know the best way to prevent constipation is to have a diet including plenty of vegetables, fruit, fibre, drinking 6 to 8 cups of water or water-based fluid a day. This is us in a perfect world, but you know, we might have children that will only eat brown food or white, you know, there's so many limitations on there. So, you know, we do understand that this could present a real challenge. So we wouldn't just go on the helpline and say, well, this is what you need to do, because we understand not everyone can do that. So it is the final thing really I would say with that is mobility. Being active helps to encourage the bowel to squeeze, to move the poo along. If you have a child who has limited mobility or no mobility, then that bowel's not going to get that, you know, squeezing action as strongly. So again, constipation can occur there as well. So we talk about constipation all day long here because it's so relevant.
I can't believe when you said, was it 1 in 3 children?
Yeah.
That shocked me. I couldn't believe 1 in 3 children. Gosh, I mean,
really?
I think parents and teachers will be reassured when you said that bit about that you understand that some children's diet, you know, it's all very well and good saying you need to be eating more fruit and stuff, but that can be a challenge for a lot of families. So I think anyone who's thinking of ringing the number will be very reassured that you're not just going to say, oh yeah, just eat more fruit, because I'm sure they'll have thought of that already, and they've done a bit of Googling and realised that what needs to be done, but we'll have that barrier of restrictive eating perhaps, and thinking, well, that's not something we can do at the moment.
Absolutely. And it's important to note as well that constipation can't be treated by diet. So, you know, so you know, you can help to prevent it, but in children, constipation needs to be treated with medication. So, you know, so it's not like, you know, you know, a healthy diet obviously does help to keep the bowel healthy and the bladder healthy, but constipation needs treatment.
I didn't know that. I've learned something already. Wow. There seems to be like 2 big issues. I know there's a lot of things we could talk about. It seems to be 2 like main themes that I wanted to cover in the podcast. The first being sort of thinking about the very youngest children in schools, and reports of more children starting school in nappies, which we know is a problem, and how teachers are able to support these. We've got less teaching assistants perhaps in classrooms, how we're managing that. And then the other one on sort of for more older children perhaps, is the reports of some schools locking toilets during lesson times, and the impact on this on children. So that's the 2 things I'd really like to cover, because I know they're topical. People have been chatting about them. And I'd quite like to make a bit of a difference as well by talking about them, because I think some of them I feel a bit quite strongly about them, as sure you do as well. So we start with the very youngest children in reception who are we're seeing more of them starting school in nappies. There was an article on the 5th of January in The Guardian by David Bell, and it was titled, "Pandemic Babies Are Arriving at School Still Wearing Nappies. Where's the plan to help them?" It didn't actually have loads of information in the article about children wearing nappies, which was surprising. But the title was quite clickbaity and made you think, oh wow, is this an issue? Is that something you're finding? Is it true? Are there more children starting school in nappies? Like, why is this? Is it the pandemic? What's happening, and what's the plan?
So yes, this is an issue that we're aware of. It's certainly a thing, but it predates COVID.
Right.
This was on our radar for several years before, and you know, it was an issue that schools were reporting, and even in some cases having to put in additional staff to help with those new entrants around toileting. And it's complex. It's not one thing. It's a confluence of different things that have come together to sort of put this on a bit of a trajectory. If you look at the history of toilet training, 50, 60 years ago, you're seeing that most children were out of nappies by 18 months old.
Oh, wow.
And that figure over time has risen to around about 3.5 is now the average age that most children will be potty trained or out of nappies. And why is this? Well, like I said, there's different reasons. So one big reason is the rise of very good disposable nappies. These have become much better, much cheaper, more affordable, and they do the job better than ever before. So children are not getting the opportunity to feel wet. So they're not getting those signals to understand, oh, I don't like this. I'm gonna move on from nappies because I don't like this sensation. So when children don't get that feeling, they've got this lovely little mobile toilet strapped to them that doesn't need changing so often, and they can continue on in relative comfort, playing and what have you. So that is one.
That gosh, that's surprising. I was thinking about nappies from like a parent point of view, thinking, oh, it's a convenience thing for us. Like, it's great, you know, you don't have to think about toilet training because you've got these brilliant nappies that hold everything in. You don't have to think about it. But I hadn't really thought about it from the kids' point of view. That's for me being a bit naive there. But yeah, if they're not feeling that discomfort and don't feel the need to not wear a nappy because it's brilliant, then they're not going to be wanting to be toilet trained, are they? They're not going to have that
That's
need.
right. And, you know, naturally, children often want to be independent and they want to do things on their own. But in a way, these reusable nappies have become so good that they're preventing that process from happening, I suppose, or delaying it. But other factors are contributing to this. Over time, more parents you've got more households where both parents are going out to work, and so children are spending more time in childcare settings.
Yeah.
Or you've got split households where children are going between two different sets of parents or grandparents, and that doesn't help because potty training is something where you need consistency and routine.
Yeah.
If you're changing between home and a nursery, or one parent and a childminder, all of these different changes make it more difficult to establish that routine that you need to get through the potty training or toilet training process.
Yeah.
So that is another factor. Eric actually did.
Sorry, I was just going to say that must be hard for parents knowing that, because you can't really do very much about it, because a lot of the time now two parents do need to work. We do need to rely on other people to look after young children. And it's almost like being told that in the past it would have been a lot easier because of that, but you can't really do anything about that, can you?
No, and this is where it becomes difficult, because then when people start to talk about these reasons, blame starts being apportioned, which is completely unhelpful, because that doesn't get you any further forward. And the blame is wrong in this situation, because it's just the way life is now. This is how things work. You factor into that. We did some market research with many nursery chains actually a couple of years before COVID, asking them we did this jointly with the NDNA, asking nurseries what their potty training policies were and what training they had available for their staff. And a huge proportion of nurseries, the majority of nurseries, did not have formal training for their staff in how to do potty training. So a lot of staff there reported that they didn't have the confidence to support families with potty training. You know, families who might be putting it off or didn't know how to start. If you know, you'd be maybe thinking that your earlier setting might be able to help you with that, but if they're not sort of on top of it either, then that doesn't help. Because obviously your child might be spending 8-10 hours a day in nursery.
That's really surprised me. Again, I would have presumed you could go to them for advice and they would know way more about it than us, and would be able to like,
and some do, but not all of them
do.
So and then I suppose finally, one of the other big factors playing into this is the sort of the decimation of public health visiting services. And other community health support that families maybe in the past would have been able to reach out to and get support from, and they are just not there anymore, or they've been massively reduced in many areas. So typically it's at your child's 2-year check where a health visitor might have that conversation with you around potty training, and that 2-year check might take place from 18 months onwards, or around about that time. Well, if you're not having that meeting anymore because the health visitor there's just not enough of them in your local area for them to have that face-to-face with you. We know some areas where your 2-year check is essentially a form that you get to you fill in yourself as a parent, and you're sort of checking the boxes. That would have been the ideal time where you can get that additional support to ask the questions around, how is potty training going? Have you come across any problems? And to just start, and particularly with your first child, you don't know what you're to look for if you're not an expert. I remember with my first child, I missed several signs of things not as they should have been with toileting, and if you don't know, you don't know. No, and that's why that lack of sort of professional support from health visitors is a real blow for families, because you can't do this on your own. You need professional support and help. And
it's not just like intuitive to know what to do, is it? No. And you also need somebody that you've built up a little rapport with them to be able to ask them personal questions about your children like that. It's not like filling a form out is so, I don't know, it just doesn't seem right, does it? It feels like you need to have somebody that you, like it should be, like you should be able to go back to somebody that you spoke to before when your child was really little and you've been back for various things, and you can just bring it up and chat about it.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so sad, isn't it?
So for all of those reasons, that is why we've got to this position now where you do have schools reporting that more children are turning up either in nappies or just can't use the toilet independently, and are having accidents, and so then require more support with changing. And, for every accident or time that they're having to be out of the classroom, they're missing out on learning and they're missing out on socialising. And that's a real loss for the child, because it's an important time in their life, and they want to be mucking in and getting involved and having fun in the classroom, not sort of spending time outside as a class. So that's a real shame.
Yeah, and I imagine it builds sort of a bit of anxiety and worry and stress and like lack of self-esteem and all of that. And, with your peers as well, you don't want to be the one that's got to have toileting issues when you're at school with, peers. Some children aren't very nice to each other, are they? So,
well, that's it. And at that age, that is when children are becoming more aware and self-conscious around their own bodies and what's going on, and noticing other children as well. So you can style it out a bit, I suppose, when you're sort of 2 and 3, and children are sort of blithely unaware of things like that, probably to a greater extent. But when you start getting to school, it starts to matter more.
Yeah. And so this article said, where's the plan to help them? Is there a plan? Like, what is the government doing anything? Is there any plan to sort this, or is this on your shoulders?
Well, we're not aware. I don't think we're not aware of any targeted plan around this issue. We know it's not, for example, it's not an issue that has a nationally set target around it, like other issues like toothbrushing or vaccinations does. So therefore it's not prioritised in the same way. So that would be where if you want something to happen, you need a target in place, I suppose, for something to be measured against, and that isn't there.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So obviously there's going to be children starting school who aren't toilet trained because they haven't been toilet trained, but there might also be some that have like a specific unidentified need around toileting. How are teachers going to recognise the difference between those sort of groups of children?
Well, every child's development obviously is different, individual. So the answer really is it would be very, very difficult to spot that. We are very much all about starting the conversations much sooner. So and we can talk about that a bit later, but working together with parents when children first offered their school place, you could be saying are any problems with toilet training, get that idea, but generally the thing that you would see as a teacher or a classroom assistant or anyone working in school is that you might see a child who's soiling. You won't know, are they, have they been toilet trained, or is there a problem? And so for us, really, because constipation can cause wee accidents, it can cause soiling, and so we go back to, again, educating families and staff around spotting the signs of constipation and having those open lines of communication with each other to be able to work together to sort of, resolve the problems.
Yeah, I suppose it's just not being embarrassed to talk about it, really, is it? And to
Absolutely,
have those conversations, like you're saying, transitions, like when they first making contact between families and the school, like making sure those conversations are being had, because it is a really important thing.
Yeah, I mean, the key really is educating staff and parents. But, it's also going back to the constipation, because it's common in potty training, but it isn't always identified until later. So obviously we were chatting before we started this podcast about the fact that we get many, many calls in July and August of parents who call us saying, my child starts school in September and they're still in nappies. What do we do? Or they will only poo in their nappy. And that's a massive issue. So, we need these conversations. We need to be identifying, or at least knowing where to look for the information on constipation. A child can poo every day and be constipated still. So, so by helping teachers and parents to identify the signs, it can go a really long way towards supporting the child to become clean and dry. So we would say open dialogue, inform and educate everybody that you can. And I do think that new parents' evening, I don't know if that still happens when my children are little. Is a great opportunity to be saying to people, keep an eye on your child's bowels, healthy bladder, and also being able to say, if there are problems with toilet training, come and talk to us.
Yeah. And if you're a parent and you're sat in that meeting, before they start school, and there's a teacher at the front and they're being so open and honest about like bowels and bladders and just talking and saying, if your child isn't toilet trained, I imagine if you're sitting there worried about it, it'd be a huge weight lifted off a parent's shoulders, thinking, great, well, that means I can go up to that teacher and I can say to her, no, or him, no, my child isn't toilet trained, do you have any advice? And it sort of opens it up for you, rather than thinking, oh gosh, I'm the only one, my child's the only one, I'm all by myself in this, I need to sort it out, because otherwise it's all on me, I'm going to look like a bad parent.
And that's what people feel, because shame is, that comes across in so many of the conversations we have with families, is those feelings of shame and isolation. Because whilst you might talk about toileting or nappies when the children are, tiny preschool, it's not the sort of thing you stand at the school gates and chat about. So like you say, you do start to feel like it's just my child, everyone else is probably, they're all toilet trained and, never have any accidents. But opening that conversation up, we have a poo checker on our website, and that's our key resource really to give to people. If you can't give them anything else, give them that, because if they at least know what to look for, that would be the best thing to do. But they talk about head lice in the new parents' evening, don't they? And can they get themselves dressed and undressed for PE? Can they hold a knife and fork? Well, can they use a toilet?
Yeah, it's a bigger issue really than a lot of them, isn't it? It does need to be spoken about.
So.
Yeah. You're very biased, obviously.
No.
But no, it does, absolutely. And so for children with special education needs and disabilities in general, sometimes, and with stress, not always, we said that it can be a little bit more difficult sometimes, toilet training. Do you have any specific advice for parents and teachers of children with special education needs when toilet training? Is there anything they can do?
Well, I think first of all, it's to know that many children who have additional needs can learn to become clean and dry. I think that's one of the main things. It just takes a different approach. It might take slightly longer, but you can get there. And we've got a lot of resources on our website to help. So there's I think, well, I'll come on to it later, but we do have some sort of assessment forms that we can complete. But it's good to know that they can, that if your child already has some sensory needs or any kind of differences in their sensory awareness, then that might affect their toileting. So it's knowing what to look out for. And again, it's that communication between home and school, and not being afraid to say, my child's got a problem. It is so embarrassing. We're not all used to just talking about poo. It's for us in our job. obviously I can say it and I'll talk about it to anybody, but I do realise that it's not a comfortable subject for many people. So I think it's just making it easier to have those conversations. And the other thing I would say is, we have an additional needs section on our website. We do offer webinars. We've got an additional needs webinar coming up soon for toileting children with additional needs. We have an intimate healthcare plan, which I think can be really good resource for parents and staff, school staff, to use to open up the conversation, to talk about the individual child's needs, and how they're going to work together with that.
Brilliant. That sounds really useful. You sound like you've got all bases covered on your website. And when you're thinking about people aren't used to talking about poo, it's ridiculous, but I'm very aware that we're saying these words a lot more than I say in normal days. In this podcast. And I know this podcast is about this topic. I've written the questions, I've done some research on it. So it's true. Even I'm finding, which I shouldn't, I feel embarrassed that I'm finding it strange talking about it, but I am.
No, I did when I started my job. I totally get that. I was like, how am I going to say this word? Because we don't. But maybe that's the key. Maybe if we were more open about just talking about it, then there would that just reduces the shame and the isolation, and so I think it makes a big difference.
Because kids talk about it quite a lot. Little kids talk about poo and wee quite a lot, don't they? They like to say the words, but we often tell them to stop talking about it as if it's like forbidden. You can't talk. But
they love it
anymore. Yeah, they love talking about it. We should be more like 4-year-olds.
We should. We've got so many books on our website, all about poo and about children talking about poo, and because and I suppose the purpose of that is to normalise it for children. Because we are so restrained ourselves in saying those words, and yet when we come to a child who's got a wee or a poo problem, we know we need to have the conversations with them and make them more comfortable. Especially, say, child with additional needs who might have a lot of anxiety around toileting, or they might be scared of their poo. Well, that's a time when we need to be, looking at poo, looking at books. I know it sounds weird, but you have to normalise it.
And if we're all being very British and like, oh no, I can't talk about poo, then that's not going to help the child open up about I'm saying the word right, talking about poo, are they, if we're not doing it as well? That's really, really good point. I've lost my train of thought, but I was going to ask, how will staff notice if a child is ready? So if they've got a child who started reception who isn't ready, they might have special education needs, they're not actually ready to use the toilet, and then they start to become ready to use the toilet. What are they, especially maybe if they've got like communication difficulties, they're not able to communicate their needs, what sort of signs are they looking out for? Because I remember being told the signs for, your little ones when they're when they're toddlers, but is it different for older children? Are we looking for the same things? What?
It is. So, some are the same, but there's a lot of differences, and we do have what's something called a toilet readiness assessment on our website. So really we're looking for intervals between wees would be about an hour and a half. That's when and that's the same with potty training. If they can go an hour and a half between wees, then you starting to think, okay, maybe. With their bowels, then, and obviously schools might find this very difficult to know because you don't know when a child's going to poo, but they'd ideally be going between 3 times a day and 4 times a week. That's to make sure they're not constipated. Can they sit safely and comfortably on the toilet or a potty for at least a minute? Can they sit up with themselves, and are they showing any awareness of their full bladder and bowels? Can they communicate their the feeling? And can they help to pull the pants up or down? Can they wash and dry their hands? And can they respond to commands? So, there's lots of different things. That's all on our toilet readiness assessment. And they, and parents can fill out a bladder and bowel assessment chart, so just looking at how often they are weeing, how often they're pooing, just to kind of see where they are with that. And obviously we do have to think about interoception. So, which I'm sure is a topic that your listeners are all very familiar with. But that recognition of the body's internal signals. I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, I need a wee, I need a poo. Recognizing those signs. For some children, that feeling is overwhelming and it can cause distress.
Yeah.
So it's not just about them not feeling it. It's sometimes
they can feel it more than others. So
Yeah.
looking for them having more exaggerated responses to it, in a sense, more sort of maybe feeling the behaviour might change, them feeling upset or distressed, or that side of things could be signs that you might not expect it to be linked to those. But if they're feeling those feelings bigger, then it might
it could be that. And obviously I think, you know, what you might start to see is if a child starts to be aware that they might need a poo, then they might be there might be discomfort, they might be wriggling, you know, they might be, if they're mobile, they might be trying to squat down or trying to cross their legs, various things to try and stop poo coming out, you know, because obviously that's the thing. And I think, you know, one thing I would say is that and this is a message that I personally would love to get across to all education settings, is that the bowel squeezes most strongly 20 to 30 minutes after eating. So I've worked in primary school for many, many years, and I know that we used to send all the children to the toilet to wash their hands before lunch. Then they would have their lunch, they would go and have a run around, and then they would line up to come back into the classroom. And then without fail, they'd all be putting their hands up in the afternoon saying, I need the toilet. But if we bear in mind that the bowel squeeze is most strongly 20 to 30 minutes after eating, that is our prime toileting time. Also, going back to what I said right at the beginning about mobility, helping the bowel to squeeze. So you've had your lunch, you've gone and had a run around in the playground. What happens next? You probably need a poo, but actually no, should have gone before lunch. So, you know, so there really is this thing, and that's another thing that, you know, that people could be looking out for, is that sign.
Yeah, gosh, yeah. I'm learning so much. So I'm like literally like, oh, I didn't know this. This is brilliant. Yeah, really, really useful. So one of the problems I think a lot of reception teachers might be having is they've got perhaps less teaching assistants now than previously because of funding. And if they've got more children who require some additional support with toileting, what do they do with limiting staffing? Like, how do they actually manage this? Because that must be a worrying thing, because, you know, if you've got a class of 30 and you maybe don't even have a teaching assistant some days, what do you do if you've got a child that needs some extra help?
Yeah, we do realise this, and we, you know, and a lot of people do talk to us about this on the helpline, and we know it's difficult, you know, for teaching staff if you don't have additional support. So I think communication with parents and carers is key.
Yeah.
Completing an intimate healthcare plan. We've got templates and examples on our website. You know, having that, maybe a communication book. Supporting parents and carers to identify and treat constipation, because, you know, if a lot of soiling accidents are happening because of constipation, then if we're you know, getting that message out there and trying to support them to kind of treat that would hopefully reduce the accidents in the classroom. Getting them to the toilet at the right time. Again, I know that's tricky. It's not down to the teachers, is it? It's the school's policy. But I think encouraging drinking regularly as well. Yeah. Promote healthy bladders and bowels. So a lot of this is trying to prevent problems so that it makes life easier for the staff. That's really, you know, what we can do. But again, that communication and having a healthcare plan in place is really good.
Yeah, that must be really hard for the teachers as well. If you think, it feels almost counterintuitive, but you're right. But like, to say they need to be drinking more, but you'd be thinking, well, if I'm always spending time with these children going to the toilet, I don't want them to have all their drinks accessible all the time, because we're having so many problems with them going to the toilet all the time. But actually, that's helping, isn't it? They need to be hydrated and they need to be lots.
They do, because what happens is children will probably have a drink before school, and then they sip a little bit through the day. But if they haven't got their drinks on the desks, they probably forget about it, you know, because they often do. And then when they get home from school, they might have a big drink. But actually what happens is that the bladder is like a balloon, and it needs to stretch, and it's a muscle, it's all muscles, so it needs to expand. And if you're putting loads in it and then nothing for hours and hours and hours and then loads again, you know, that's not encouraging it to be healthy. There could be wetting accidents that happen. Strong wee irritates the bladder. So, you know, again, so it does sound counterintuitive. I completely agree. But if we can exercise those bladders and teach them to hold more, then ultimately the child can probably hold their wee for longer in the long run.
So in the long run, it's worth doing. So
Yeah.
if schools wanted to develop a SEND friendly toileting policy and posh training, do you have any advice or resources for that?
So we would recommend looking at your existing toileting policy,
Mm-hmm.
and just looking out, what are the expectations, what support can be offered.
Yeah.
The schools need to make sure that their toilets are child friendly. We would highly recommend letting parents take a tour of the toilets, showing the children, telling the children how to get to the toilet, when they can go, those kind of things, and what rules there are around them. Recognising the needs of the children that attend that school. And children need to feel able to ask to use the toilet. Some are too embarrassed to put their hand up. So there are things like having a, I need to go card, or a signal. So, a child might go and put a magnet in the corner of the whiteboard, and that's their signal that they need to go to the toilet, or a card in front of them on their table. So things like that, making it really easy for even the most embarrassed child, or one who doesn't have the means of communication, to say, I need to, to show a way to go. So it's all about that, really. And, good practice, send the children to the toilet after lunch. But we do have, as I said, a toileting children with additional needs section on our website. So I think it's, really good to look at that when looking at policies. And we do have a nurseries and schools and colleges section on our website as well. So there's a lot of guidance on there for schools when writing their policies.
Fabulous. And that links us quite nicely to the second big issue I wanted to talk about, which I think has been all over social media recently, about toilet locking. Because there's been reports of schools locking toilets during lesson time, sometimes even breaks, which I was confused about. I don't know, I didn't really understand that bit, because I was thinking, well, when do the children go? But anyway, mainly during lesson times. Is this something you've heard about? It's not just a thing on social media that's blown out of proportion?
Yes, this is sadly something that we have had lots of families come to us about, and tell us of various different ways that this is being deployed in secondary schools. It's not usually primary schools, and it's and the consequences then that has on children. So schools are employing this practice to tackle one problem, which is kind of behaviour, poor behaviour. Because that's a perennial problem. Young people and school toilets, that's as a problem as old as time, of the sort of the behaviour that children get up to in school toilets. It just kind of time wasting through to sort of full on bullying and that kind of thing, which makes toilets then an unpleasant place for everybody else to visit, unfortunately. But the problem with that kind of policy is it creates problems for children that need to use the toilet, and that's in a couple of ways. Because first of all, it's practically, the issues that creates is that it's often a member of staff's job to go around doing this locking and unlocking, and we've heard from some families that sometimes that person doesn't get to the toilets on time to unlock them at break or lunch, and so therefore they are locked during lesson and then partially locked during some of the playtime, break time as well. So you've got this long queue of children needing to go to the toilet, waiting behind a locked door. So that's one problem that's sort of practically created. But bigger than that is it establishes a battleground, I suppose, between the staff and the student body, because it is almost like a barricade is being put up, a physical block is being put up between the school, the sort of the corridors and the classroom and the toilet space, and that kind of then gets you into the mindset, well, this is a battleground. And so then it becomes a very polarized subject, and people would get very naturally kind of very upset about that. So for those two reasons, it doesn't solve the problem.
No.
So it makes it difficult for all children, but specifically then it makes it more difficult for children who've got a underlying medical condition or a need to go during lesson times, because it is then a right palaver, because they have to go and find, even if they get permission to go, they then have to go and find the person with the key to go and unlock it. And so what could have been a quick 5-minute absence from the classroom becomes a 10-15-minute absence because they're off on a hunt to find the key holder.
Yeah, it's not right, is it? And I'm just thinking, like, a child, well, they're not children then, are they? They're teenagers. And if, you know, a teenager in secondary school who's got some sort of additional need or toileting need that means that they need to be going to the toilet more frequently or whatever, surely they've got the right to privacy for their medical needs as well. Like, it doesn't feel right that everyone will be aware that they've got needs. If they need to be going to ask for a toilet key to go to or they've got a toilet pass, then people are aware of their medical needs, which seems wrong.
Yeah, exactly that. It is a balance, of course, because teachers will know that there will be some students that want to leave the classroom more frequently than probably they need to. And so they have to apply judgment on that. And, you know, actually, when children do need to go to the toilet more frequently, that's often because it's a medical condition they have.
Yeah.
And it's a medical condition in the same way that other people have asthma or eczema or a broken leg. It's, you know, it's nothing, it shouldn't be something to be ashamed of.
Yeah.
And so that we don't want to kind of encourage this environment where nipping off to the toilet because there's a problem with it is a shameful thing and you don't need anybody to know about it. When people are students at secondary school, and if with a medical condition, with a bowel or bladder condition, they do need to be brave and make their life will be easier if they have a trusted adult at that school that they can tell and explain and talk to. And if they have a group of friends that they feel that they can share that information with, it will help them to have that conversation and to explain, look, this is what I have, this is a part of me, this is why I go to the toilet more often or need a bigger toilet to go to because maybe I have equipment that I need to use or to have changes. And those conversations will help to take the stigma out of that, and other children can be wonderfully accepting of that when people say things. But I completely understand why there is a risk around that because people can often be cruel and not understanding as well.
Yeah. So I presume Eric's view of locking toilets is you're not in favour of the locking of toilets. What is your viewpoint then?
Well, this topic usually comes up. It's in secondary schools where it's more of a problem.
Yeah.
Because I think staff in primary schools have more flexibility to and younger children, and there's more acceptance of frequent toilet visits, etc. So we're talking about secondary schools here, and denying access to toilets during lesson time. No, we don't recommend it because it creates. Yes, it's trying to solve one problem, but it creates another. So what you do about that is the really hard nut to crack. There is no law that says schools cannot close toilets or lock them. There is very little legislation governing access to or provision of toileting facilities in schools for students. So there are very few levers to pull on to make schools do things. You know, it's on a school by school basis, and that is from one trust to another, or if it's a local authority school, it will be down to that staff and management to implement a policy. So that's where it becomes difficult to say this is what you should do because all schools are different. And annoyingly for us, you know, we hear all the bad stories, Eric, quite naturally so. We hear fewer good stories. But there must be some schools out there getting it right.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there are we hear from some parents of teachers that have come up with ingenious things, specifically usually with primary school children. But you know, it can be done. sorry, I've lost my train of thought.
No,
What's the question?
it's a really tricky one, isn't it? I taught in secondary, so I've been there. I get what it's like from the teacher's point of view. If you get a lot of teenagers saying they need to go to the toilet, and some of them don't need to go. You can see which ones they might have asked a few times, and that they're wanting to go and meet somebody, and you can see how it happens. But then there are going to be children in there that you could miss that might need to go to the toilet for reasons. It is hard, and it is hard to work out how to not let it disrupt your lesson, but also let children use the toilet at the right times. And I completely get it from the teacher's point of view that it's easy for us to say you shouldn't do it, but it's a tricky balancing act. But from a parent point of view, like if your child needs to go to the toilet and you're hearing that the toilets are being locked during lesson time, that's huge and that's horrible. And you must really feel for the children that do need to use the toilets and they can't.
And though it shouldn't have to happen, there are things that students can do and parents can do, so that your school might have a student council. That might be a route in to have a discussion whereby you come up with a toilet use policy that the staff and student body and teachers agree, like a code of conduct, as it were, that everybody agrees to sign up to and respect. And that's a contract almost between the staff and the students. You as a parent, you might try and find a champion for this on your board of governors. There might be a parent governor or any of the other governors that you could approach to kind of raise this issue and sort of highlight what problems this is creating. And see what solutions that you can come up with. There are some practical limitations, though, because, for example, there are no national guidelines on how many toilets a school has to have per pupil.
Oh, wow.
There's some guidelines, but they're not enforceable.
Wow.
And it's not statutory. So, if schools do not have enough cubicles, you're just going to get those queues at a break time, and so then students choose not to go, and then they need to go in past time. So, if for a lot of schools, just having more cubicles would solve a lot of these problems, because you wouldn't be queuing, hanging around, waiting to go at the time when you can go. But that's expensive.
I was just going to say, easier said than done. We know what school budgets are like at the moment. That's a tricky one. Is there anything that schools, I haven't put this as one of my questions I was going to ask you, but are there any schools that you know of that have got it right, that have managed to get the balance right? And what do they, so I'm just thinking, if somebody's listening and they think, right, we do lock our toilets at school during lesson times, but we wish we didn't have to. Is there any way, what can they do? What's the best practice? Is there a school that's doing it right that we're aware of, that have got a really good way around this? Or is this just a problem that we're going to go around in circles with and no one's going to solve?
Unfortunately, we don't have an example of a best practice school that's doing this. Please, if anybody's listening out there and would like to get in touch to show off what they're doing, we would love to hear from you.
Yeah, that would be really interesting, actually. But yeah, please, and if you want to get in touch via me or and I'll pass the message on, I'd be really interested to know how schools are getting it right. Because like you say, there will be schools who have got the balance correct and are managing to meet the needs of all students and stop the behaviour and the bullying in toilets at playtimes during lesson times, and stop disruption during lessons, but also meet the needs of children that do need to go to the toilet during lessons. So yeah, it'd be really interesting to know how they've managed to do it.
I would say, actually, this is something for the future, but we have a group of young champions that give their time to help us at ERIC, and they're running a survey at the moment, a nationwide survey focused a lot on school toilets, which it's a group of 12 to 18-year-olds, and they're circulating this amongst their peer groups, and links have been sent out to schools across the UK to try and get as many responses as possible, and that is asking questions about from young people of their experiences of using toilets at school, access, the quality of the provision, etc. So that's running for another month yet, but we're hoping to get some good information from young people themselves, because they see it best. They won't hold back and tell us.
No, absolutely not. No, that's brilliant. That sounds great. And last one before I ask you about links and how we get to your website and stuff. Using the toilets can be overwhelming for a lot of children. They can be too busy, scary. Some kids don't like to go to the toilet because they're not very clean. They're a bit smelly. It's overwhelming there. The lights are bright. It's too noisy. There's too many people there. I could keep going on. What do we do to keep these children feeling safe in the toilets and not feeling afraid to go?
Well, following on from the last subject, that's maybe my answer isn't going to be the best one, but for a lot of children, it would be choosing quieter times to go to the toilet.
Yeah.
So going back to, having a plan where between the school and the family to make sure that they can go. For younger children, they might like to have their own toilet time bag, so perhaps a drawstring bag that's got a few things that are comforting for them, so that they can get that. So the key to being able to wee or poo properly is to be relaxed. So obviously a smelly toilet, one where there's gaps above and below the door, or the door doesn't lock, or all these different things are not conducive to relaxing to be able to properly wee and poo. So again, you could end up with accidents. So a lot of children at home might have a toilet time bag, so books, toys, games, or something comforting, their own toilet seat in a bag that they can put on the toilet. If there are children with really particular anxieties or extreme anxiety, then speak to the staff about maybe having access to the disabled toilet, so that so there's more privacy that way, and actually being able, again, knowing when they can go, knowing how to get there, knowing how to ask and all these things. But it's so important that we help children and young people to relax, but again, it's teaching children respect as well of each other, because saying things like, oh, you've just had a really smelly poo, is going to make that child go, well, I'm not going to do that at school again, and I'm going to hold on, and so there's a lot of different things there. But but
we've got a terrific video on our website, actually, on our school toilets page, with a parent who is recounting her experience of how she worked with her child's reception and then year one teacher, to kind of ease the sort of transition, I suppose, between home and school, because what was working at home was working, but to try and take elements of what worked at home and introduce that into the classroom environment, and to kind of help create that consistency. That it's chock full of tips. It's a brilliant little video. It's 10 minutes long, and it's a parent's experience of how they've worked with a very accommodating teacher, but between them they've come up with some very inventive ways to make it easier. And then when the toileting becomes easier, suddenly other things become easier too. The stresses start to drop away, so it solves more problems than just the toileting, if you see what I mean.
Absolutely, and probably more problems than people realise as well. Brilliant. So links, we've spoken about quite a few. I will put links in the show notes below. So if you're listening to the podcast on your app, on your phone, or on the computer, if you scroll down, you'll be able to see some of these links that we're going to put on there. And if you're watching on YouTube, they'll be just down here, will be the links. What links am I putting on there then? Presumably you want the one to your website?
So there's the website, the helpline.
Brilliant. I'll put the number for the helpline, put the website on there, and that'll be absolutely brilliant.
I think a link to the individual healthcare plan template would be a great one. This is the template where parents, families and school staff can work together to identify what issues are and agree support mechanisms that can happen at the school, and that may or may not be done along with a school nurse if there is one as well. So that's a useful one to look out for.
Oh, thank you both so much. I've learned loads. I feel, when you've learned loads of information, your head feels a bit mine feels like that. So thank you so much. It's been really, really helpful. It's been good to talk about a taboo subject that shouldn't be taboo at all. I've never said the word poo so many times in an hour, but I really hope this is helpful, and I feel like we've covered some really important issues. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. You're very welcome.
They were fantastic guests, weren't they? I'm really pleased we're able to cover this topic. We've got loads of resources on our website, so have a look at those in the show notes, as well as the links that I've mentioned to Eric's website and their resources as well to help with this. Thanks again for listening to Sending the Experts with me, Georgina Durrant. Make sure you subscribe. Thank you.